Mute yourself. So, hello, everybody. As you can see, we are creating as we go along. Hi, Paula. My name is Diane Wong, and we want to get started right away with this. We're going to be, if people are having trouble getting in, we're going to be trying to reach out and get them in here, but you're all here. So thank you, and let's get started. The work we're going to do today, the Racial Justice Collaborative, can we mute ourselves so that we don't make noise while I'm talking? Thank you. The work we're doing today is really important. You all know that. That's why you're here. We have a social fabric that is just torn up in many pieces and about to be shredded. So, so the work we're doing must happen. I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Racial Justice Collaborative. We've been working for this whole year on bringing you a kind of a history, American history that you haven't received or might not know much about, or you may know a little bit or a lot. So, but we've been bringing that to you this whole year. Today, we're going to start into a deeper dialogue, and you're all a part of that. So at the end of this, toward the end of this, we're going to do a group process that is, we're calling it a fishbowl. And in that fishbowl, we hope that you're going to volunteer to participate. So listen up. Jordana and I are going to do a presentation in a few minutes. Pharaoh is doing a presentation. He's going to go back over the history of what we've done this year. Jordana and I are going to present models of reparations, and reparations is the topic that we've chosen to talk about because reparations is a hard topic. And so this is what we're going to do today. Jordana and I are going to do a presentation, and later, not too much later, Lane is going to do a presentation. He's going to be talking about resilience. We talked in September about resilience, and that was trying to help white people develop resilience. But white people are not the only ones. We all have to become more resilient. So today, our offering is for everybody, whoever you are. Get yourselves ready. How do you get ready? Lane will explain all of that, but in a nutshell, you relax and breathe, what I'm not doing now. So let's everybody take a deep breath in and then exhale. I find that if you audible exhale, you release the tension and stress from inside the body. So let's do that again, and do that again and again as we go through the day. Inhale, hold it, open your mouth, audible, exhale, ah, ah. So after Lane gets started with working on resilience, he's not going to just present information. You're going to get a chance to practice, and you're going to then move into the small groups. We're going to do small groups today, and in the small groups, you're going to have more practice, but not just practice like I just did, breathing in and out. You're going to be talking, and you're going to be talking about topics that maybe you don't usually talk about. Race, and we're going to talk about race and racial history and how we feel about it, and reparations and what we feel. Notice I keep saying feeling. Try to keep your awareness on your feelings. We're not asking people to put aside or dissipate or get rid of your feelings. No, we're asking people to explore their feelings, to talk about how they're feeling, but breathing in and out so that you stay in the discussion it's so important that we stay in the discussion. You're going to have a 5-minute break. And in that break, 5 minutes, because we've got a lot that we're doing. So why don't we start now? And Adam, if you can do the recording of Farrell, our spokesperson, our historian for the Racial Justice Collaborative, he'll take you through the whole year. So Adam, I know that Adam will bring that up any minute. And in the meantime, Adam.
Welcome, everyone, to the Opening the Door to Racial Dialogue, hosted by the Racial Justice Collaborative. When we're going over this, we're going to be addressing the topics that we have begun with and continued through over the course of the year of 2021. And that starts with the beginning of that history, and that is the theft of land and the expulsion of people from that land in this country, part of America's original sin. Removing the people, and then how later systems would continue to corroborate and exacerbate those issues continuing forward into modernity. All of this is connected to interlocking systems of power and how the theft and enslavement of people were brought into the colonies of the New World in order to make the land and the resources found in that land profitable. Those resources were then harvested and sent to Europe, where there were factories and industry, in order to turn that raw resource into finished goods, which were then distributed to the rest of the partners in this trade, this triangle trade. This is a very important aspect of how all of this continued, because it links to both manners of states and colonies that weren't as directly invested into the direct ownership over enslaved Africans, for example, which is how many people envision the full extent of the slave trade. But the slave trade is far more complicated than that. It involved shipbuilding, it involved major ports of entry, and all of these things are tied to other colonies besides just those of the Deep South with the large-scale plantations. In addition, a lot of these things, a lot of these industries and companies have direct corporate lineage to modern companies, as well as many of these companies that exist in the modern day are literally just old enough to have had direct ties into dealing with things like insurance of enslaved people and other industries such as that. All of this is tied together into how all of these interconnected systems continued to propagate the vast and extensive network that is known as the triangle trade. The most famous resource harvested in the United States during the height of slavery is, of course, cotton. And cotton was a very important resource because a newly invented machine at the time allowed it to be harvested and cleaned at such a rate. So because it became so much more profitable to have people enslaved, that many more people were enslaved, both in terms of higher number of people brought in through major ports, and eventually, when that was outlawed, through an increase in the productivity of the internal slave trade. As every American should know, the end of slavery on the federal and nationwide level, of course, had to come through conflict of arms, with the southern states seceding and forming the Confederacy in order to continue the practice of slavery, as that was the financial base of their entire way of life for the you know any sort of meaningful capacity. The Civil War, of course, was brought about for a variety of reasons, all related to slavery, but the morality of slavery is often overhyped from particularly the Northern Yankee perspective and the history of the event itself. But regardless, at the end of the Civil War, it resulted in the defeat of the Confederacy, the end of the attempted secession, and the end of slavery. However, slavery ending abruptly without any meaningful transition led to further difficulties. There were, of course, planned efforts of transition, such as the field order given by General Sherman of the Union, which was to have parcels of land divvied up from the former planter class of the South, which was, of course, the leader of the Confederacy, the lead social class, and given in small parcels to families of the formerly enslaved in the process that would be known as 40 acres and a mule, quite self explanatory. However, this process never came about. It made it to Congress, but never made it past or through the legislative branch, and therefore was effectively dead. There was small aspects of transitionary protocol and transitionary oversight, but these things were largely killed during Reconstruction as it was deemed far more socially and politically important to appease the Southern planter class and reintegrate them back into the Union rather than to protect the newly freed Black population. And so they were largely ignored. This newly freed Black population was largely left to perish in the way of overexposure, left out of sight and out of mind, and perhaps simply left to die completely. However, as anyone living in the modern day could attest to, obviously the Black population of the United States did not just completely die, regardless of how little was done in order to prevent such a fate from happening. And so, with such things, new processes and new laws were put in place in order to maintain and regulate this newly freed Black population. This started with the Black Codes, often thought of and referred to as slavery under another name. The Black Codes were, of course, the spiritual predecessor to the later Jim Crow laws, where you would just have a social, completely other set of standards and principles to hold freed Black populations against compared to their white citizenry counterparts. Another important thing that came from the Jim Crow era that came as a succession to the Black Codes were the social caricatures that came out of Jim Crow, which many people are still very familiar with in the modern day. This is where a lot of these specific social and visual stereotypes associated with Black people truly reached their height and were able to be further propagated throughout the American social consciousness and unfortunately forms of media and entertainment simply for the purpose of mocking Black people. As the social interaction between the United States and its freed Black population continued to develop, it reached all forms of new heights, particularly under a number of legal cases that would continue to uphold practices of racial segregation and maintain status quo while claiming to be progressive in some way or another. Whereas former legal codes, such as the Black Codes, wouldn't have even attempted to claim to be equal in any moral or social capacity. The later claims, such as the Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal cases, would claim to be aiding or beneficial to the Black population by giving equal treatment or at least claiming to. It was very obvious to any observing it in any legitimate or open sense of observation that that was far from the truth, and that it was still very much a tremendously two-tiered system, with black people receiving massively less and facing significantly more scrutiny, punishment, and difficulty. All of this built up and built up and built up massively to the point in which it faced backlash, significant backlash by Black populations, particularly Black populations that received training and experience in battle through being veterans of such American conflicts like the First World War. These veterans would return, help to organize communities, and resist these massively overreaching and oppressive laws that were put in place. Though many of these revolts, many of these miniature revolutions, so to speak, were successful in many ways, a lot of them faced tremendous and brutal suppression, to the point in which entire communities throughout many parts of the United States were simply destroyed, bloodied, and gruesome treatment can simply be traced to removing entire communities and cultures off the map in many ways. As the relationship between African Americans and the United States would continue to develop, the particular trend of African Americans continuing to serve in the armed forces would continue going into future conflicts such as the Second World War. And there were benefits that were supposed to be offered to any and all soldiers that were contributing in the Second World War, such as the GI Bill, among others. These things, however, never properly reached the Black populations of the United States, and many of those benefits that would go on to be foundations for many families and Americans' ways of life, financial securities, and foundations for homes and family bases, these things were simply skipped over for the Black populations, leading to a continued economic segregation and economic depression that continues to affect Black people to the present day. You have a tremendous wealth gap as a result of this. You have white families that, due to processes like the GI Bill, when their ancestors fought and bravely contributed in the Second World War and the cause of the Allies, their families were able to afford houses, which had tremendous capital, they had great wealth, and these things were able to be financial bedrock for the populations that would come later in their families, and rightfully so. However, Black people were not able to be granted the same benefits, despite them being supposedly able to be granted the exact same rights as their white counterparts that also served as veterans in the Second World War. A lot of these things are the exact foundations that cause the modern wealth gap, and why so few Black people have intergenerational wealth and assets from one generation to the next compared to their white counterparts. This relationship would continue and continue and continue until eventually a number of groundbreaking cases would begin to finally seem to make change during the Civil Rights era. A certain example of this is the Brown versus Board of Education case, in which legal segregation was finally considered to be inherently unequal in circumstances such as public education. This was incredibly important, as these massive divides that have been in place for decades were finally starting to shift, but it would be a while before these things would give, and there would be great backlash from white society for these things starting to change. There are all sorts of issues that came in results of things like this, but a great example is the Boston busing crisis, in which there were tons upon tons of mobs and just violence against children that were going to be integrated into these new school systems. My family personally in the Boston busing crisis was heavily affected in this, with my father being one of those children that were just taunted and physically threatened by these grown adults throwing stones and bottles and brandishing weapons against these children simply for integrating as the law deemed. The relationship is ever changing, ever developing, and as things seem to improve, there are still countless issues that need to be faced and overcome to continue. One of these very important things, particularly in the modern day, is the relationship between African Americans and undue imprisonment and disproportionate imprisonment for all manner of crimes, especially such things as nonviolent crimes and possession of narcotics, which now in the year of 2021 are perfectly legal and massively monopolized by massive white-owned corporations. All of this history, all of these things together blend into the overarching system of white supremacy. Historically based and continually perpetuated through manners of culture, interaction, and all aspects of daily life within the United States and abroad, all culminate into this organization of power which oppresses those on the lower end and props up those on the higher echelon, which of course in this system is those of European descent in the United States. It's important for us to be able to speak to developing resistance. We need to be able to understand the history, what came before, in order to know what to do next. It's important to understand these things so that we have the mental fortitude and the emotional strength to do something about these things. It's an ongoing dialogue. It is a constant skill that needs to be refined. And these things are a great way in order to help do those things for yourself.
Okay, thank you, Farrell. And here we are back again. Now we're ready to move on. We want to bring Jordana. Here's Jordana. Actually, I'm looking at her. She's in the little square next to me. So we can keep you can set your own view, but right now we'll just look at everybody. I want to remind everybody, as you can tell, looking at the screen, we're recording. So if you don't want to be in the recording, your face, just turn off your video. But later on, when we get to the fishbowl group process, we're really hoping people want to join in. And at that time, you'll need to unmute your video. So bring your videos back on. So Jordana, can you open us up and start the presentation?
Yes.
And yes,
thank you. Here we go. Adam's putting it up. So Diane and Farrell, thank you very much. And Diane, thank you for this opportunity to do this with you. I just want to let people know that I understand probably within this group there are, many people who maybe have not ever thought of reparations to the African descendants of slavery, ADOS, and others who've been, sort of studying it and thinking about it in personal terms and academic terms. So what Diane and I are going to do relatively briefly is to sort of give you a context or the contours of this kind of a discussion, because we want everyone to feel that they have something to to give to this discussion, whether this is a new topic to you or you've been looking at it for a long time. I also want to make sure that you understand the context of what Pharaoh presented was sort of the leading up to this demand for reparations, or this opening of the door to dialogue. So when you think of everything that he brought up, that is the basis upon which, you know, we essentially are talking about the big payback. There's a great podcast called The Big Payback for those of you who want to learn more about reparations. I also wanted to point out very quickly, there was a recent article in New York Magazine called The Case for Climate Reparations, and it's by David Wallace Wells. He basically says the climate issue was put there by the rich and it's an existential threat to the poor. So he says that generally, but he also talks about it in racial terms, historic and current racial injustice. And he basically says one measure of responsibility, this is in quotes, for anything that's been done is what it would take to undo it. And as we go through this, my personal position is there are things that can never be undone in this. The stripping of humanity, of family, from slavery all the way to the present. And so we'll discuss my particular position when we talk about restitution and the tort model of reparations. But in any case, I see it as a legal and a moral debt. It's not an apology. It's not charitable. It's disgorging the wealth that white people have gained. At least that's my take and my look at it. So Adam, can you go to the next? Diane, I was hoping you might read this by Ashley M. Jones. She's Alabama's new poet laureate, and this will solidify at least some of what I've said.
So let's start by everybody taking a breath so you can be relaxed. Let's take a deep breath in. And you think money can ever repay what you stole? Give me land. Give me all the blood you ripped out of our backs, our veins. Give me the songs you said were yours, but you know came out of our lips first. Give me back Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and Medgar Evers. Give me back the beauty of my hair, the swell of my hips, the big of my lips. Give me back the whole Atlantic Ocean. Give me a never-ending blue and a mule.
Thank you. So I don't know about all of you, but I'm feeling a lot hearing that and hearing Diane read it. But anyway, let's continue. So as a reminder, and this goes back to Pharaoh's presentation, we are not just talking about the centuries of slavery. We're talking about everything that happened after the Black Codes, Jim Crow, separate but equal, and everything that's happening now. There are enough studies to show us what's happening in schools, doctors' offices, the courts, the jails, employment. And so when we look at reparations, we're addressing what William Darity, and please make a note of him, his book is From Here to Equality. He has an amazing kind of layout of how reparations can happen, and we're going to hear a clip from him shortly. But basically, he calls it 3 tiers of intentional, interlocking, and justice. And intentional is important because this is not just a big mistake and sort of things have snowballed. Everything that has happened has been intentional to this day, which is really the bedrock of the need for reparations. Next slide, please. Adam, yeah, thank you. This is just a visual of what we looked at. We've seen this in our other presentations, and we at least the Racial Justice Collaborative, we find this to be very powerful because it shows you how much time has gone by with this type of repression. Next slide. We're going to hear from William Darity. Remember, all of this is giving you information for your dialogues.
Well, I have a very specific view of reparations, and it's a view that we outlined, Kirsten Mullen and I, in our book, From Here to Equality. We think that reparations must have 4 components. The first is it must establish who's eligible to receive reparations. And in our argument, we propose that it should be Black Americans who have ancestors who were enslaved in the United States. Secondly, the legislation that eventually gets developed should ensure that reparations plays the role of eliminating the racial wealth gap in the United States. The racial wealth gap is the primary and most powerful indicator of the cumulative effects across generations of white supremacy in this country. It would require an expenditure in the vicinity of $11 to $12 trillion to eliminate that gap. And once we focus on that objective, it becomes clear that many of these other tactics, proposals, plans that people are putting forward to be called reparations really don't function as reparations. The third attribute that a reparations plan ought to have is it should involve direct payments to the eligible recipients. And then fourth and finally, it needs to be a project that's conducted by the federal government for 2 reasons. First, the federal government is the only level of government that has the capacity to meet the bill. If we took the combined budgets of all the state and local governments in the United States, including Evanston, Illinois, that would come to $3.1 trillion. But the amount that's required to eliminate the racial wealth gap is in excess of $11 trillion. So states and localities can't do it. The federal government can, and we are aware that the federal government can do it, in part because of our recent experience with the funds that were amassed to address the coronavirus crisis very quickly without raising taxes. But the other point that I'd like to make is that the federal government is the culpable party. It's the federal government that bears the legal and authority responsibility for the series of atrocities that Black Americans have been subjected to from the period of slavery into the present moment, where we have mass incarceration, police killings of Blacks who are unarmed, as well as ongoing discrimination in a variety of areas.
So for you, even if the states had the capacity to produce 11 or 12 trillion dollars to meet reparations, there's another philosophical and moral issue at stake here. You would not support state-based reparations even if the funds were available. Is that accurate?
I would not be so inclined to do so, in large measure, because what would happen is I think that states would adopt very different programs. You were talking about the issue concerning states' restoration of control over the abortion rights. And that would eliminate kind of a unified project for reparations. So I think it's important, regardless of whether or not the states had the capacity to do it, that we do this as a federal project. This is a national responsibility.
A national responsibility. What form should this responsibility take? There are many debates, not just about whether or not reparations should be given, but what form they should take. Are we talking about a stimulus plan type of check sent out to the descendants of formerly enslaved Africans? Are we talking about free public education? What could reparations look like?
So let me say at the outset that indirect measures like scholarships for education are not going to turn the trick in terms of eliminating the racial wealth gap. It's noteworthy that the median Black household head with a college degree has 2/3 of the net worth of the median white household head who never finished high school. So equalizing education or improving educational standards in the Black community is not going to turn the trick in terms of addressing the racial wealth gap. And that's what must be the target of a reparations program. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it should be conducted in such a way that direct payments are made to eligible recipients, just in the same way that direct payments were made to eligible recipients under other reparations plans. Whether it was the German government's payments to victims of the Holocaust, or it's the United States government's own payments to Japanese Americans who were unjustly incarcerated during the course of World War II. There's no reason it should be any different for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, thank you. So one of the things I wanted to add to what Professor Darity said is he talked about the difference in the heads of household wealth and the racial wealth gap, that it's not based on differences in income and salary, but it's based on inheritance and intergenerational transfer, which involves cash and land and houses. And any of us who have experience with any of those understand how much wealth they bring into a family, and that it can be descended or bequeathed to our younger generations. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's not about employment and income, but it's about land and housing and cash that families, white families, have been able to amass, and that Black families have basically been purposefully denied those opportunities. So this really just summarizes some of what he said, that it talks about owes for lost wages, and that does go back to the period of slavery with this theft, essentially centuries of theft of labor that allowed the US to become what it is today, the most wealthy country in the world. The Federal Reserve in 2016, this goes back to what Professor Darity said, that you look at the family wealth of 171,000 of white families compared to the average for Black and Hispanic of 17,600 and 20,700. That didn't just happen by chance. It's a cumulative effect, as Professor Darity said. Next slide, please. So here we go to who pays. Now, we heard Professor Darity say the only entity that can pay is the federal US government. We have, and I won't go through them, but this is a reminder that we have institutions offering scholarships. We've got private corporations setting up funds for this and that. They are choosing how they want to, they might see as disgorge their own wealth. They don't get to do that, so it's not called reparations. Reparations is by the federal government, and it's direct payments or grants of land or housing, something like that, as Professor Darity said. There have been, and we had reviewed this, I reviewed this in our last event in August, there have been private and class action lawsuits against entities, the Aetnas of the world, JP Morgan Chase. Really, none of them have been successful. And we'll look at that in a moment as to why. So next slide, please. Here are types of reparations. Again, cash, housing, land, scholarships. As Professor Darity said, that really isn't going to work. It can help an individual here and there, but it cannot be viewed as reparations. And baby bonds, that's an interesting one, and you can look it up, but basically it's the federal government. The idea is the federal government sets up these accounts for all babies born. Again, it includes all babies, so that's not reparations because it's going to all babies and not to the babies born to African-American families in particular. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick look at calculations. We looked at the number one in 1860. This is really going back to during slavery. Judah Benjamin said, our slaves directly and indirectly involve a value of more than $4,000 million. That's in 1860. So when you look at that figure, and this is from Darity's book, you see the source there. He compounds it to 2 trillion, 9.3 trillion, and 42.2 trillion by 2019 using particular interest rates. Again, I don't want to go into those details, and I'm not an economist, but we can see that those people who are credible in the field, these are the figures they've come up with. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, Diane is going to look at the atonement model of reparations. So I want to quickly go through this to give her time. We're talking about restitution and redress in the tort model. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, this is a model that is backward looking and victim focused. It is it's based on legalities. It looks at unjust enrichment. It looks under contract law, in fact, and it looks at a number of other legal options. It does not call for a mutual movement of racial reconciliation. And some people feel like that isn't going to happen anyway. So let's get on with the business of the tort model or something like it. And let's deal with atonement and dialogue later. In this model, there is no apology or admission of guilt by perpetrators or beneficiaries, white perpetrators and white beneficiaries. There's a settlement. Next slide. Again, just a bit more corrective justice, restitution. This is really now an outlier, this model, in the reparations dialogue, because it does not involve atonement or bringing white people into discussing our role either as perpetrators or beneficiaries of the system and what we gain from it. It doesn't allow a healing in a public forum. Next slide. We go back to what Pharaoh mentioned. I just thought this was very interesting. When you look at that 40 acres calculation, this is from Professor Darity. The present value of that sum compounded to the present at each of those three interest rates at 3%, 4%, and 5% would be 168 billion, 733.2 billion, and 3.1 trillion. That's the value of the land had that promise actually been kept. And I think it's interesting to look at what was the value, what was it at the time, and what would it be now if freed Black people had that land and been able to bequeath it to their descendants. Next slide. Oh, that's an odd one. Diane, I'm not sure what's happening with this, but I believe we're at your section on atonement. So thank you very much, everyone. Diane, you're on mute.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now I'm not. Okay. Thank you, Jordana. And we heard the tort model. And let's talk a little bit. I say let's talk because we're talking. I'm talking to you and you're thinking about it probably and talking in your head. Try to just listen. Try that. So I'm going to talk about an atonement model, but I'm also going to talk about a different model, not too far in, because that is the new model that I really resonate with. But the atonement model, unlike the tort model, the atonement model is forward-looking. It's perpetrator-focused. So, and that means that there is redress, and it comes in two stages. First, there's the apology. But the apology is, it's more than just a statement of apology, like what President Clinton did years ago. It's a heartfelt something that has to come from the nation. And that is going to take some effort and some participation. So the atonement model starts to work in some participation from the people. Let's just switch to the next slide to keep moving us along. So atonement is a process, and it includes reparations, but it also has a way for a discussion to happen, for people to talk. One of the best atonement models out there is Germany, and what the efforts and now notice the efforts that Germany undertook to atone for the Holocaust, and it wasn't just limited to money. So, for example, in the German atonement, there was, this is really critical, there was an outlawing of the use of symbols that incite hatred against any segment of Germany's population. So what does that mean? We can look in the United States and we see there's still a continuing discussion about these symbols. In Germany, it was the swastika. Here in the United States, it's the Confederate flag. It's in the United States, we have monument after monument after monument of the generals and the people that were in the Confederacy. If you go to Germany, you're not going to see statues and monuments and models, because that was not just put away as we do sometimes here, it was outlawed. So as this is how Germany looks at it. The responsibility rests on the German nation as a whole. Could you go to the next slide? Of course, reparations were paid. So they thought, if you have murdered and you've also inherited. And so in the name of the German people, unspeakable crimes, this was their chancellor that said this, unspeakable crimes were committed which created a duty of moral and material restitution. So go to the next slide, please. And go to the next slide after that. We don't have a lot of time. So nope, go back. This is, okay. Go to the next slide and go to the next one and the next. Okay, so there are some slides, there are some missing slides in here. I don't know where they went to, but let's just, before we get to this, I want to point out that there were some reparations efforts that were made in the United States in the past. The most significant one in my mind was that reparations in 1862, even at the beginning of the Civil War, reparations were made, and Kathy is going to start dropping these into the chat, so you'll have the URL and you can look at these for yourself. There were reparations to the slave owners. So not a dime went to the newly freed people after slavery was declared over, but reparations were actually made to the slave owners. And there was a Reparations Act. They were paid $300 per person. So that amounted to about $930,000. And in today's money, that would be about 25 million. So there were other reparations over the years, the Tuskegee experiment, where there was compensation for medical brutality. In the Tuskegee study, they encouraged Black people. It was mostly men that were suffering from this bad blood. That's what they called it, but it was syphilis. And when the study first started, there was not a ability to cure. Penicillin hadn't been found as the cure yet. And that was in 1932. The study started in 1947. That's when penicillin was discovered to be the cure, and they didn't give it to the Black people in the study. They wanted to see what untreated syphilis resulted in. So they used the Black people, the study group, and they continued to experiment with that. And it wasn't stopped until the 1970s when a reporter uncovered that there was this study going on, and that even though there was a treatment, that the people in the study were not receiving the treatment. And so there was, I think, about $10 million that was set aside for the reparations for that after a lawsuit. And finally, I don't remember the exact amount, but it was a small amount that was given to the families of the deceased. And they did agree to pay for the burials. So that's what they got. They got burials. And there was other reparations efforts in the United States. We all know about the reparations effort for the Japanese Americans, and that was in two segments. There was, in 1948, there was reparations for the loss of property that went to Japanese Americans soon after World War II. There were approximately 26,000 claims that were forwarded, and over almost $37 million was given for the reparations for Japanese Americans for the loss of their businesses and the loss of their of everything that they lost. There was another redress offered in 1988, and that was a $20,000 per individuals of Japanese ancestry for the fundamental injustices of the evacuation. And so that was the Japanese. There has been a Native Hawaiian reparations, and that had to do with having overthrown their kingdom and taken their land. It was taken. And so they were now allowed, if they were 50% Native Hawaiian, they were allowed to lease government property for 99 years for $1. So that is there's still a lot of sticking points about that program, which hardly anybody knows about. There was another reparations program in the United States for Native Americans, and that is that's kind of, it's ongoing. It ranges from sovereignty to payments, but there are payments that have gone to Native Americans for the loss of their being pushed off, for the theft of their land. So those are the main ones. There have been some other reparations programs, small ones. There are reparations programs also outside of the United States. The big ones that we know about: South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which I've heard recently people speak of as being cosmetic. And that's because although there was this big discussion about what happened during apartheid, there's been little change. The same people that own the land still own the land. The power structure is essentially still in the hands of the same people. So there have been very little in terms of any kind of compensation to the people of South Africa, the Black people in South Africa. There's the Canadian reparations program that is ongoing right now. And they've started with the splash. They've got about 94 actions that they plan to take, of which only 14 they've taken. And we're noting that of the 14 taken, they're the easiest ones to do. So that remains, the jury's out on Canadian reparations, but you have to say they're doing it, and they're talking about what they're finding, and they're not denying it any longer, and they're not trying to hide it. So there, of course, is the German model. And in the German model, the biggest thing that I want to point out is the German model was a decision that was made by the German government to pay reparations and to pay for Israel. And so they're still paying. And it's an ongoing process of trying to make whole the Jewish people and the other people that were caught up and murdered during the Holocaust. So that's the biggest atonement model that is successful. I like that model a lot because it does has atonement, and it does have an apology, and it does have reparations. But the problem and the model that I am pressing forward is the conversation model. So the conversation model is a new way of looking at it. And what can we do in the face of a history of violence and discrimination? The conversation model takes way big steps backwards and reaches its arms out and puts it around the map from sea to shining sea. And it says, we have to do something and we have to talk about it, but we're all going to have to be involved. The biggest thing that I like about the conversation model is that it's asked the question, how do we heal the nation itself? The nation is torn apart. It was torn apart. It was torn apart from the beginning. We shouldn't be surprised. Look, slavery in the beginning, theft of the land in the beginning. But now we have to say, okay, how do we heal the nation as a whole? And it still has reparations, but not as an end in itself, but as an integral aspect of the larger process of social healing through justice. And for the Racial Justice Collaborative, our main mission is healing our racial divide. We can throw money at it, and we will, and we should, but that's not going to heal our racial divide. So we're going to foster healing through reparations. We're going to embrace reconciliation rather than compensation as a foundation for reparations. Reconciliation, or as Jordana says, conciliation, because we can't reconcile what has never been conciled. So in doing this, then social healing through justice identifies repairing damage to group members, because Black people in the United States are citizens and people and members of the group. We're members. And so how do we heal the members of the group and the white people and all of the damage that has happened to you by the loss of your humanity? We have to heal ourselves. So that's my feeling about a conversational model for reparations. In
Diane?
Everything, yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, just so that we all stay on our time frame, I think we have to move on to Lane at this stage.
Yeah, we're ready. Go ahead. Lane.
Thank you so much.
Unmute myself. Hey, everybody. Wow, just taking all that in. Thank you, Pharaoh, for that powerful recap, short overview of the harms and injustices and inhumanity perpetrated by white supremacy on Black people in this country. And Jordana and Diane, thank you for your illuminating presentations on models of reparation that could begin to address and redress hundreds of years of violence and harms. So yeah, now we're going to transition to dialogue about reparations. And this is a cognitive intellectual endeavor, and not only, right? These issues live in our history, in our emotions, in our bodies, and our spirits. And talking can be difficult and painful and potentially explosive. And Nancy just wrote in the chat, I think that was Nancy, yeah, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, how do we make these conversations safe for Black people? I think that's so important a question. And so I want to offer some thoughts and a practice to help us be in this conversation together and stay in this conversation together without hurting. And we're going to need Black people, people of color, white people to be on board in order to make reparations happen. So we as a nation need to learn to have conversations like this together. So first of all, I just want to invite you to put your feet on the floor if you're able to, and just notice your breath. And just notice how your body is responding to all that we've heard and seen so far. Yeah. Our bodies, our spirits are responding to this, not just our minds. And so, since there's so much trauma from white supremacy, even having conversations about race and about reparations can be difficult and traumatizing. So I want to first talk about how we can all build resilience. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Whoops, I almost left the thing. How do I share my screen? There we go. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Can people see my screen share? Raise your thumb, Jordana. Oh, nice. Thank you. All right. So I want to start by talking about resilience. And yeah, resilience is the capacity to recover from stress and difficulties. It's not a lack of discomfort, it's the ability to tolerate discomfort, to be able to be with what is happening, to be able to stay present with ourselves and others. And a great model for resilience comes from trauma work. In trauma work, they talk about the window of tolerance, and most people spend most of our time in what's called the window of tolerance. It's called that because in that window, feelings and reactions are tolerable, and we can think and feel at the same time. We can feel empathy and compassion for ourselves and for other people. When something happens, when something stressful, scary, traumatic, or just stressful or scary, we jump out of our window of tolerance and into hyper arousal. It's like fight and flight. Our brain and our body are screaming, don't just sit there, do something, right? The lion jumps out from behind the tree and we have to fight or run away from it, right? The car is on top of the baby and the mother like lifts the car off the baby, right? That's what happens in the hyper arousal. It's super important. And then when the danger is past, we come back to our window of tolerance. And if fighting or running away won't help, we instead respond by going into what they call hypo-arousal, very low arousal, right? The other person's bigger and faster than me, so it's not going to help if I try to fight or run away, right? Or I break my leg and I can't do anything, right? And in hypo-arousal, we submit or we appease the other person or we freeze and we're just immobilized. And the brain and the body are saying, don't move. It's not safe. And then when the danger is gone, we come back into our window of tolerance. Now, when trauma is involved, like in a dialogue about reparations, there's a lot of trauma involved. It can be really hard to get back into the window of tolerance. So when trauma happens, we can get stuck in hyper arousal. We can't calm down. We get angry, we get scared, we get agitated, we get overwhelmed. We can't tolerate our feelings or our reactions. We can't think and feel at the same time. We get cut off from our empathy and our compassion for ourselves and others, and we get stuck there. Or maybe we get stuck in hypoarousal. We shut down, we feel shame or depression, or we get numb and we feel nothing at all. In hypoarousal, we often can't say no. And again, we can't tolerate our feelings or our reactions. We can't think and feel at the same time. We can't really have access to our empathy and compassion for ourselves or for others. So as you can see, if we get stuck in hyperarousal or hypoarousal, we can't be resilient. We just get stuck in the stress and the trauma. So the big question is, how do we get back to our window of tolerance? So one thing that helps is noticing our discomfort. And one way, and then doing resilience practices that help us regulate our bodies and metabolize our experience. And by doing this, we grow our window of tolerance and we become more resilient. And in a moment, I'm going to invite you to do a resilience practice that can help you come back to your window of tolerance in case your body experiences emotions or body experiences that become difficult to tolerate during the dialogue that we're going to have. And our hope is that this practice may help you to both be with your experience and also come back to a sense of relative safety and well-being. Relative safety and well-being. Not we're going to be nice to each other and so it's going to be safe, right? But how do we find safety in our own being? Relative safety and well-being so we can constructively engage in the conversation. That's what it's all about. How do we stay here so we can constructively engage in the conversation? And I imagine some of you may be thinking, forget that. I don't want to go near that discomfort. I don't want to go near that pain. And that is totally understandable and so real. And there's so much trauma that is historical, intergenerational, institutional, in addition to all the personal trauma, right? So I want to offer some wisdom from Resmaa Menakem, who's a healer, a trauma specialist, a New York Times best-selling author of the powerful book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. I just had the incredible privilege and pleasure to do an 8-hour workshop with him on Thursday. It was just incredible wisdom and what a powerful man. So he talks about what happens when we avoid pain. And he talks about dirty pain. He said, dirty pain is the pain of avoidance, blame, denial. When people respond from their most wounded parts, become cruel or violent or emotionally or physically run away, they experience dirty pain. They also create more of it for themselves and others. And then he talks about clean pain. He says, clean pain is pain that can build your capacity for growth. Experiencing clean pain enables us to engage our integrity and tap into our body's inherent resilience and coherence. Paradoxically, he says, only by walking into our pain or discomfort, experiencing it, moving through it, and metabolizing it, can we grow. So I want to invite everybody, let's practice walking into our discomfort and experiencing it and moving through it for a moment. So I want to just invite you, first of all, to just notice where you are. Just look around your room. Yeah. Put your feet on the floor if you're able to. Notice your breathing. Notice if your breath is quick or slow. Notice if it's shallow or deep. And just let your breath be exactly as it is. And just notice your body experience without judging it. Just allow your body experience to be as it is. And remember a place where you feel well. Maybe a place in nature where you feel well, or in the home of a friend or a loved one, or in your own home. Or if you prefer, you could think of a person you feel really well with. And imagine yourself in that place, or imagine yourself with that person. Just really go there in that place or with that person in your imagination. And let yourself soak in that experience of being in that place, of being with that person. Soak it in. And notice your breath. Notice your body sensations. Notice any emotions that may arise. Now take a deep breath and exhale. And remember something that was said today or shown today that made you uncomfortable. Something that made you uncomfortable that you heard or saw today in our time together. There sure was enough there. And pay attention to what made you feel uncomfortable. And just notice that discomfort now. And as you notice that discomfort, notice what happens to your breath. Notice your body experience. Notice any emotions that arise. And just allow that to be as it is. And now again, remember that place where you feel well, or that person you feel well with. And imagine yourself there in that place or with that person. And notice what happens as you imagine yourself, as you're there with that person, as you're soaking in that experience with that person or in that place where you feel well. Notice what happens to your breathing, to your body experience. Notice any emotions that arise. And now remember again that moment that made you feel uncomfortable. And notice your breath, your experience in your body, your emotions. And now go back to that imagination of being in that place where you feel well, with that person you feel well with. And really go into that and soak in that experience. Yeah. Okay. Now come back to the room, look around you, look to the sides, look in front of you, look behind you. Yeah. Check the doors. Yeah. That's right. So this is where we are. So in trauma work, this is called pendulating, like a pendulum, pendulating between a difficult experience and a resource in yourself, going back and forth, pendulating between that difficult experience and that resource. So what we're doing is we're practicing being with our discomfort and then settling ourselves again. And this grows our window of tolerance, our ability to tolerate what we're experiencing. This is not the same as muscling through that experience, right? It's metabolizing the pain or the fear or the discomfort rather than ignoring it or just getting through it. And if during this reparations dialogue you find yourself going into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, feel free to use this practice to settle yourself so you can both be with what's happening inside of you and also be with what's happening in the conversation and engage in the dialogue. So resilience doesn't just mean not getting angry or scared or defensive. The point isn't to stop our feelings or our reactions or to cool out, right? But being able to tolerate our reactions and our feelings and body experiences so we're not driven by them, so we can stay in this conversation. We were talking about this at our Racial Justice Collaborative meeting a couple of weeks ago, and Frank, who I hope you all know, he's one of the leaders of the Racial Justice Collaborative. Frank said something really wise in that meeting. He said, the disallowing of heated emotions is so much a part of Western civilization and white supremacy and the patriarchy. And he said, disallowing emotions helps white supremacy maintain. So instead, during these dialogues, we invite you to notice what you're feeling in your body and your emotions, to remember that your voice, your point of view, your experience is needed for this dialogue to be open and honest and real and useful. And express your own position, your own experience. Be open to hearing another position or experience. And if you get too activated or shut down, try that resilience practice or one of your own resilience practices that you know. So the last thing I want to mention is some wisdom from Kenneth V. Hardy about 6 essential ways of relating to each other to help promote and sustain difficult conversations about race. Ken is a brilliant author and psychologist and speaker and trainer and consultant on topics of cultural and racial diversity, trauma and oppression. He's got a book coming out in March called The Enduring, Invisible, and Ubiquitous Centrality of Whiteness. And I have the privilege, he asked me to contribute a chapter to that book on the vicious cycle of white centrality. So that's coming out in March, I think. And then there's another book that's going to come out soon after that that he's working on now called on racial trauma. So to have difficult conversations, especially about race, he recommends that we develop these 6 relational muscles. The first one he talks about is intensity. He says intensity refers to the willingness and capacity to develop an increasing level of comfort with discomfort. And it means deliberately stretching ourselves beyond our normal comfort zone, asking one question more than we're comfortable asking, or making one statement more than we're comfortable making. The next one is intimacy, that he calls the ability to express vulnerability and be vulnerable. and relating to each other with a spirit of openness and non-defensiveness, the sense that we are in this together. The next one is transparency, that he says refers to the willingness to show ourselves and be seen, the willingness to let down our defenses and risk exposing vulnerabilities. And at that Racial Justice Collaborative meeting, we were talking about what's needed for this race retreat. And Sundiata, who I hope you know also, he's here also, he said, you need to know someone to see if you can build with them. And that's what Ken Hardy's talking about with transparency. And then the next one is authenticity. Authenticity refers to the ability to say what we mean and mean what we say. And Frank at that meeting said, it has to be letting down defenses and saying, this is what I think, not trying to read the room and figure out if what I have to say is going to make the most people happy. So that's authenticity. And congruency, Ken says, is achieved when we are thinking, when what we are thinking and saying is in sync with how we're behaving. Then the last one is complexity, which is the ability to simultaneously hold two seemingly disparate entities. For example, to strongly object to the egregious behavior of someone and simultaneously find a redeemable quality or trait in that person. Whew, that can be hard sometimes, but that's what he's recommending, right? Yeah. These are muscles. Can we stretch ourselves to develop these muscles? So I just want to warmly invite each of you to look at this list and just notice which of these are easy for you and which ones you feel some resistance to. Yeah, which are easy and which, well, I don't know about that one. Or it's hard for you. And I just want to invite each of us to stretch a bit more than we're comfortable with these 6 points, so we can have a real and fruitful dialogue about this vitally important topic. And what Ken Hardy says is stretch, but don't tear. Yeah. How's everybody doing? All right. Whew. Anybody have any questions or comments you want to say or put in the chat? We just have a couple of minutes before. Whoa, there's a lot of great things in the chat there. Whoa. I want to read some of those things. Anything in there, Kathy, that you want to highlight? Sorry to pull that on you.
No, I think there's some back and forth dialogue, which is good. People kind of talking to each other.
There we go.
Yeah, one thing I've seen a couple times that I think, maybe in the small groups that might come out is African Americans versus other Black folks who've migrated. That came up a couple times, and Janana had a few things to say about that. But I think that'll be a conversation maybe in some of the smaller groups. And just people ready to talk, sort of smaller groups, about reparations in general.
Well, that's
one last thing, just how a lot of the conversation on sort of practicing the resilience, how that ties to the larger conversation. There were a couple folks who wanted to try and connect it a little better. So again, that might come up in a small group as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Really helpful. So yeah, so we're just about to head into the small groups. So I just want to give a little intro to the small groups, because now we're moving into dialogue. This is what it's all about. So Adam is gonna, in a couple of minutes, is gonna randomly sort us into groups, and each group is going to have a facilitator. And so when you get there, please introduce yourselves just with your first name and how you identify racially and also where you're coming from. So just those three things: your first name, how you identify racially, and where you're coming from.
I have long time learned now that what you don't know will kill you. They're the blinders on the draft horse. You're not supposed to see that way or that way. You're not supposed to look behind. You're not supposed to know. When we talk about reparations, or at least when I talk about reparations, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about money, yes, but I'm not only talking about money. The money will run into the trillions when the calculation is done. But the crime is much larger than that. There is no worse crime than you can commit against a people than to strip them of the story of themselves. For if you don't know your past, you cannot see your future. And so, from that point on, I began to develop an investigative curiosity about where we were and how we got here. It may be difficult for those who have not studied these things, given the blinders we've all been fitted with, to believe that in the 1200s, in the 1300s, if one looked at Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Asia at that time, no one would have guessed a few hundred years from there that Europe would be near the top or that Africa would be near the bottom. Timbuktu was the cultural and academic center of the known world. They were doing cataract surgery in Timbuktu in the 1300s. And I didn't know anything about it. To deny me that information is a crime against humanity.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure, I don't know if you mentioned who that was, that it's Randall Robinson, an activist, and his book, The Debt, What America Owes to Black People.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Lane, a crime against humanity. Remember that.
So we're going to head into small groups now. So questions for the small groups. Kathy, would you mind putting that in the chat again? Because I think it's not the last thing in the chat now. And then if everybody else could not put anything in the chat after Kathy puts that in, that would be great. So the questions for the small groups that you're going to be thinking about are, having heard the presentations, how do you feel about repairing the harm through reparations? How have the systems and structures of white supremacy benefited or harmed you? For instance, economically, education, housing, health, employment. What are you willing to do to heal the harm? And how would you personally feel about white people being asked to pay for reparations, for instance, through taxes? Yeah. So go on, Adam, put us into small groups.
Thank you. Thank you all. I hope everybody had a lively discussion. in their breakout groups. And so we've got just a few minutes, for 10 minutes actually, for this debrief. I'm leading the debrief, that's why I'm talking now. I'm talking. So the easiest way to do it, we had 6 breakout groups. We've got 10 minutes. So how about we're going to call on the breakout groups, starting with number 6. You have 1 minute to talk.
Actually, Diane,
yes.
sorry to interrupt. I think actually our plan was to start the dialogue at 10 of, so we actually have time. We have more.
Okay, yeah, because we took the break before.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we have more. Yeah.
Okay. But we can also push that more off into the other parts too. So we've got time. So group 6, everybody take a breath in and exhale. We can't say that enough. Don't forget, if you need to take a break, just take it. Everybody's an adult.
Yeah. Now, of course, you call on group 6 when I was taking my additional break. Of course you would. We would start at 1.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we definitely need more time for the groups, because this is an extremely deep topic, and a lot. In talking about how we feel about reparations, I think it was more or less a collective agreement that it's something that's necessary. One of our group mentioned that they're working on not being fragile when it comes to this type of discussion, and a need to restructure, a feeling that we need to restructure the education process for young people so that more people will better understand the need for reparations. One of our group talked about how they had Black veterans in their family, World War I, World War II, who were denied access to GI Bill and other assistance that white veterans got, that affected how they in turn were able to generate and pass on wealth to their families. In talking about the question as far as, well, should white people be forced to pay taxes, the question came up, well, how do we identify those whites who came after slavery, those whites whose family were abolitionists and fought against slavery and try to dismantle what they could. Let me see. It was identified that, even though some people may not have been here during slavery or came after slavery, they still benefited from the white superiority. So that, they did receive some type of assistance, whether it be financial or just the ability to live their lives without any type of interruption or harm. Discussion came up discussing, what about poor whites? How would they be able to pay taxes? Knowing full well also that reparations mean different things to different people, what type of approach. One of our group talked about a holistic, with the whole being with a W, whereas looking at an atonement aspect, it was identified that taxing whites, will that truly lead to white people treating blacks better? Knowing our country has a history of any activity to lift blacks has been met with an extreme reaction from whites. Look back on Boston and busing and busing in multiple places. So wondering if that will occur. There's always been a significant backlash.
John, let's keep moving. We have a little more than a minute, but now we're chewing up that time, so we can come back to the big discussion. Okay, group 6, you did a fabulous job. You got through all the questions. How about group 5?
Were we 5? Yes.
Are you the representative?
I think so.
Maybe we should say the name.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm number 4 or number 3.
Okay.
I'm not quite
see,
sure what the group number was.
see, I don't know. Okay.
I think we were 5. Yes, Lane and
Okay.
Christina. Okay, we'll go now, and then you all can go next, whatever number you were. Okay. Some similar conversation, and my group, feel free to jump on in there. I think 2 of the things we talked about, and we did go through the questions, but we sort of went back and forth between them, is the idea I started with how daunting this whole thing is. And Christina gave a great example that I am familiar with of a current day reparations model. If you've heard of Bruce's Beach, and I forget where in California, but it was something very recently. Family owned a beach. It was taken away from the government. And now, many, many years later, it's being returned, or there's reparations being talked about of what that caused the family in terms of, you know, a loss for the family. So it was an example, oh, thank you, in Manhattan Beach, California. And we started to talk about, that's a very clearly defined, you knew the family, you knew their descendants. So yes, they get money or they get reparations. And when you go back hundreds of years, the backlash, because we did all feel that white people should have some, we didn't talk taxes specifically, but should pay for reparations. How do you bridge that gap for so many people where it's not a direct person to person? And we felt that, much like John just said, it really has to start in education and really start with making the case consistently over time so that people understand the direct connection, even though I was not a slave, my mother was not a slave, but the harm and the trauma is still there. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. We also talked about, in a lot of towns, there are people who don't want to pay taxes for the public school systems in their towns, even though that benefits everybody. So there's not just the disconnect over reparations or race. There's a disconnect for being willing to spend money on anything that is not a personal benefit to me or my family. And then if we do, it takes away from me and my family. And I say me as in other people, not me. So there's so many hurdles to talk about. It's not just should people or should people not pay it, but how do you get there? And if this isn't my generation, my son's generation, like at some point, it's because this conversation just keeps going, and there's and then eventually things change. But it has to really change with people believing that they even have any responsibility for anybody other than themselves. So that's what we talked about.
Great, thank you. So I'll try to call it by facilitator. Farrell, your group, whoever's doing your reporting. You're muted.
Sorry. So we were so caught up in the throes of the conversation that we didn't actually appoint a specific person to share the information, but I would be happy to do so unless you think it'd make more sense for somebody who wasn't a moderator to do it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we talked a lot about the sort of subtle impacts that white supremacy could have had on our lives, because there's too many examples to count with this sort of thing when you're discussing Black people. And obviously with white people, it's a little more subtle, but you can also try to extrapolate a lot of subtle influences that are sometimes overshadowed by the more blatant or vulgar things. When you're a Black person, you're thinking about your relationship with white supremacy as well. So we went a lot into that kind of stuff, you know, trying to reach into the more overshadowed, hidden type things, thinking about long-term history and how that relates to sort of lineage and things like that. We talked a lot about that kind of stuff. We talked about opinions on the acceptance and the embracing of reparations as a concept to be used for, the healing of the racial divide and all this historical injustice. Just thinking about the complications that come with it, and also its clear merits, those sorts of things. It's a lot of interesting conversation about these topics and data points. I actually really wanted to get into the last question, but we didn't have time because of how much time we spent on the others leading up to it.
Thank you, Farrell. I can call on Carol because I know she's the reporter for our group. Carol.
Thanks, Diane. Yes, I am. And if anyone wants to come in from my group, that's also great. I guess actually we stayed around the first question more than any of the others. And yes, it's time for reparations, but also there was a really clear message around it's time for reparations when we talk about money. And it's also time to say, and don't tell me what to do with my money. And to move beyond, I suppose, me as a white person, where I use isms and buts, and I start moving into excuses, and it's almost like how that creates a sense that can also be really controlling, and to move beyond that control, and it's something about me staying comfortable, and I really heard that. And it's also about, we talked about that it can be a hard conversation, but it's also time for no more excuses. There was also a message to say that some people in the group would, it's time for white people to pay their fair share. And it was really that simple.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So Katie, your group?
We must have been group 6.
Okay. Oh, you were 6.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, so I'm not sure. So Lane, Kathy spoke for your group, right? And Sundiata, your group, your reporter?
Yes, ma'am. I had an interesting group, and I'll keep everybody anonymous. Their ideas were great, though. One of them was an idea for a stock transference fund, where white families would be given the opportunity to put into stocks, to help to sort of start bridging this gap. That was one aspect. I saw one person, and I use the word person sparingly because I know it's a legal term, but one individual said, or one person, that's better, said that brothers feel all of the above as far as the reparations. Like the sentiment was, yes, right away, yesterday. You know what I'm saying? And so I thought that was interesting. One of the people spoke and said that there was a societal construct where pretty much, and they kind of, in an interesting way, showed how everybody was sort of victim to what was going on. Because even like poor so-called whites, if they don't agree with what's happening and they make a voice about it, then they're ostracized and they catch the business, right? And then there was also the admittance that that business was nothing compared to what we were dealing with. And that too showed itself. And so I thought that was interesting. So with that being said, the last thing that I notated was that a lot of these things were born, nurtured, and continued through mentalities, and I kind of kept my thoughts to myself because everything that they said was great. So.
Okay, thank you, Sundiata. There's one more group. I'm not sure which one that is. So
it's ours, Diane, group 2.
Okay, Jordana. Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
So just before our reporter comes out, we focused on we really went to the last 2 questions because they're very personal, and at least I think they're the most difficult. So Nancy, if you would want to report out, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jordana.
And keeping things anonymous, thanks.
Of course, yeah. So there really seemed to be consensus among the white folks in our group that we would be willing to make the financial reparations. And there was some sharing about personal sacrifices that had been made previously for fairness and justice. So a willingness to make that again if need be. And the importance of really focusing in reparations on wealth, not income, and on revisiting the idea of reconstruction. But we really spent quite a bit of time talking about the concept of capitalism and a concern that asking for reparations in this way would really kind of incite revolution or riot of some kind, either from individuals that were being asked to pay or from governments or corporations that were being undermined by this. And I just think philosophically, it's really fascinating because this wealth came from capitalism and colonialism. So it's kind of like going at really wanting to dismantle that from the ground up is really what we're asking to do for the reparations to really be effective.
That's great. I think we have about 2 minutes. So anybody who wants to add to this discussion, just unmute yourself and start talking.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment, and it came up on our group as far as the backlash that has occurred throughout this country to any type of Black advancement. And, you know, I think back to after we elected Barack Obama president, we got Trump.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like, my goodness. Yeah, and not to stop working for reparations, but I guess based on past behavior, what's going to happen afterwards?
Thank you. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I think unfortunately part of what white supremacy is to make Black people feel shook so that you think about those kinds of things. All that tells you is that you're doing the right thing when they push back. There's no reason to push back if you're not going in the right direction. And so I take that and as a sign of doing the right thing. But unfortunately, I think this is what we talked about in our group, is that we get into this malaise of like worrying about what will happen and how do we educate people. And this is not about education. White folks kind of know, right? They know. They know like they know about the coronavirus, right? I mean, they're just resistant because who wants to give up power? Power will not just say, here, have money, here, give up power. You're going to have to take it. And so let's just be kind of clear about that. Waiting around for people to want to just voluntarily give up power and give up money is never going to happen. So that should not be a consideration in moving in that direction.
Thank you.
I agree. That's why I feel the government's responsible. You know, the government ultimately, the country as a whole benefited from the superiority. It's the wealthiest country in the world. Yeah, it's I don't know. It's an interesting topic.
Thank you.
Antoine, I see your hand up.
Yes. So I was going to go off when Nancy's next. I was going to what you said, Nancy. You said something about capitalism and systems. So I'm all about policies, procedures, politics. Economics follows politics or pushes politics into where we're looking at power. Definitely Dr. Claude Anderson, Powernomics and stuff, and looking at the systemic direction that we got to go in this. Because when we look at systems that are in place, white supremacy is a system that is in place, ingrained in everything we have. The whole point is that as we look in capitalism is where we're at. Capitalism is never going to go away for us and stuff like that. So the thing about if I take the term reparations, if we create a system of reparations, that system of reparations is to bring down the white supremacy system itself and then be included in the capitalistic system itself. So that when we say government, we say state, we say mayors and all those different systems that are in place, we ingrain reparations in that to lower white supremacy and to have the other cultures, the African Americans, put into capitalism in a systemic way.
Thank you. The systems. of white supremacy. Yes. So thank you for everybody. We're right on time. And Lane, you want to take this?
All right. Well, we're going to take this together. I'm just gonna set this up. So we're now going to ask for 6 volunteers, 6 or 7, to dialogue together about reparations, with Diane and me facilitating that. And the dialogue is going to happen in a virtual inner circle, and then the outer circle is going to be everybody else who's holding and observing and reflecting on some questions that we're going to offer before the dialogue. And before we ask for volunteers, I just want to frame some of the roles and the positions that I heard during the breakout room. I mean, during the debrief just now, because these may be kind of starting points for what this dialogue is going to be. So I heard something about white people being fragile. I heard there was like, do we need education or not? Do white people already know it, or do we need to educate white people? I heard a thing about poor whites. Like, are poor whites going to want to do this? Is the whole thing about poor whites or not? But also I heard, well, poor whites, I saw in the chat, poor whites align themselves with rich whites with this whole racial divide. I heard a big thing about backlash. That seemed to be a big topic with a lot of heat to it, about the backlash, or what happens after, or whether that's good if there's a backlash. It just means we're doing the right thing. And then, yeah, just not taking responsibility for anybody but yourself. White people making excuses and no more excuses. And then, yeah, would this be a personal sacrifice? I noticed there was that. Yeah, I've made a personal sacrifice before. I imagine there might be a reaction to that framing of it. Is that really a personal sacrifice or something? And then, yeah, would there? I guess with the backlash again, people were talking about there's going to be a revolution or a riot if this happens, or Trump squared is going to get reelected or something like that. And how are we going to face that backlash? And then dismantling colonialism and capitalism. Just wanted to recap some of those basic themes that were coming up and seeing if so knowing that those are some of the themes, and you heard them as well as I did, so sorry, but I just want to ask who would like to volunteer to be in this part of this inner circle discussion. Maybe raise your, Dizena said she would like to volunteer. Raise your hand or put it in the chat or just speak out.
Okay, let me, Jordana, I think, has raised her hand. And
Jordana, great.
Xenia, have your, okay.
I'm down here in Milwaukee.
I'm here.
My great-great-grandmother,
Diane?
She died at 19.
Yes. Is that Xenia? Xenia?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you do this? Okay.
And I spoke with her.
I heard Tom in Milwaukee.
Okay. You see Xenia and Jordana and Dizena and Tom.
We need 2 more. Antoine, I saw your hand up.
Let's get some white folks in this.
Yeah.
We need to have a balance.
But you mean Jordana's not white?
We've got Jordana.
We need one more white person.
We have Jordana, but you need some others.
Wait, I think I heard Tom on it. Tom?
Yeah, but
I'm already in there. No fragility allowed, people. No fragility allowed.
Yeah, okay, Tom is in Milwaukee, and he's not fragile. So
Christina raised her hand.
Okay, Christina, that's good. So now we've got 3 black people and 3 white. I'm assuming I'm doing this eyeballing, And I'm assuming we've got 3 Black people, and then I'm assuming we have 3 white people. So let's go with that. You look white, you look Black.
You're looking at phenotypes, Diane,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. Okay, Lane.
So
Adam,
before we do this inner circle dialogue, I just want to talk to the outer circle, the folks who are not in this dialogue. You also have an important role in here. You're going to be holding the pot in which this dialogue is going to be cooked. And while you're doing that, we want to ask you to reflect on some questions. Kathy, would you mind putting those questions in the chat? So the questions are, what are you noticing in your body as this dialogue is going on? What are people saying that you resonate with? What moment is hot for you? And are you shifting or changing your position or feelings?
Okay, sorry.
And what is being said that makes you feel something? So those are the questions. You see all those in the chat? So yeah, what are you noticing in your body? What do people say that you resonate with? What moment is hot for you? Are you shifting positions inside yourself and feelings? And what's being said that makes you feel something?
So Kathy has those in, Catherine has those in the chat. And Adam, can you swap out Sundiata for Xenia? Thanks,
Hi, Sundiata.
I'll miss you.
Xenia.
Xenia, okay. So just to make sure we have, okay, so there's supposed to be another Black person. Who was it? So maybe we get Sundiata. So there's supposed to be 3 and 3. I see.
It was Mr.
I
Hines.
see 1, 2, 3. I see Antoine. 3 white people.
Let Antoine rock.
Antoine Hines, Mr. Hines.
Okay. Thank you, Sundiata.
Put me in the game, coach.
He's ready.
Okay.
Is Lane supposed to be spotlighted?
Yeah, Lane is spotlighted.
And Diane, you should be spotlighted too.
Adam, you want to spotlight me, and you want to spotlight Antoine, Antione. Yes.
There we go.
Okay.
And if everybody else could turn your videos off, and Adam, could you please disable the chat for right now? Hold on one second. Nobody else put anything in the chat. Catherine, would you mind putting those questions in one more time, and then let's disable the chat. It's going to be distracting for the folks in this inner circle discussion if there's people saying stuff in the chat all the time. So let's just disable that after Catherine puts those things in the chat.
And let me ask all the people that are spotlighted to unmute yourselves. This isn't going to be everybody speak in turn. We're all going to contribute all the time. And we're going to facilitate this, of course. So, I just want to say, how do you feel? Let's be authentic. Let's take the opportunity to authentically feel and speak what we feel, not what you think. Don't say I think.
What you think.
I feel. We want this to be about how you feel.
I am outraged.
I just want to say because feelings are what drive decisions.
Yes, thank you. Feelings are critical. I am outraged at the injustice that has gone on for incredibly way too long. I mean, how can we even say way too long? It should never have been in the first place, but here we are, right? And it's very, very bad. I'm outraged.
Right.
So I've been triggered, and I know this goes against a lot of what we're talking about, but this idea of nonviolence and love and empathy and dialogue to get to reparations, to me personally is a non-starter. And I know that hurts other people to hear it, but it's just how I feel. I believe it's got to come down to land, housing, and money and whatever else. We've been talking for ages, we've been studying, this for ages, and I don't know if it was Mark or a few people are like, this is a debt and it's not really negotiable in terms of how people are feeling. And that's my position on it.
Yeah, Jordana, I tend to agree with that. But I tend to agree with that and the fact that it shouldn't be based on feelings. It should just be something that happens. Even if people are forced to do it, pay reparations. But I also am part of the Racial Justice Collaborative because I do feel so strongly about Diane's call for dialogue, and that how much it's helped me personally, just talking about race and talking about my own whiteness and my place in race and privilege and all that, which has brought me to, yes, of course, I should pay reparations. America should pay reparations. So yeah, I'm not into the love stuff. I hate saying that out loud, but no, I'm not really into that. But I do feel like the discussion and the dialogue and that process is important.
I like to say, like right now in this moment, I feel extremely tense. My chest is tight. My throat is tight. I'm so happy to be here in this conversation, but I feel like I'm ready to cry. It's extremely, I can go to the right and the left of me. I live in Central Florida, and I can see Confederate flags hanging outside of people's homes. And so it doesn't feel safe for me to have these conversations where I live. And I know that it's important. And so I feel the tendency to want to do it a safe way because I fear people are crazy in here. People are fighting. These white people who feel like they have something to lose by there being justice for everyone are fighting for their lives. And just so I feel afraid, and I know it's a conversation that has to be made. And so I put in the chat, like, I want to go broad. Like when you start talking about asking individual white folk to give money, I'm like, they're going to come to my door and I can't risk that. So I look at the broad. When we look at veterans, like everybody loves a veteran, can we start there? And it feels safer to me to get where can we find the least common denominator where you're not going to have people uprising. It scares me.
Diazina, are you talking about looking at things that you consider are quantifiable? Like through the GI Bill, I didn't get X, Y, and Z, and this is the value, or like they talked about Manhattan Beach, Kathy did, it's quantifiable, but it leaves so many people out.
It does. And for me, it's a first step because we're going from, there are people in my neighborhood who don't think that I'm an equal citizen, that I don't belong here. So to go from that to having an individual white person have a tax levied against them because their ancestors were white, I think that we need a bridge. And so for me, the bridge is, what can we agree upon? Did the first round or the first wave, these are Black people who served in World War I, World War II, it's documented. And then for people who it's not documented, where the records were lost, we can start a lawsuit or an exploration. But it's like, where can we come where people aren't going to get their guns and start acting crazy? Because that's very real in the South. So I know it leaves everybody out for now, but it's a first step. And I'm really, it's like, how can we do this in an incremental way?
And what you said, you described it as rounds of reparations. I've never thought of it that way. And I think that's so interesting, so interesting. Rounds of reparations. It doesn't all have to happen. It could be the Manhattan, it could be land, it could be the millions and millions of acres that were owned by Black farmers that have been taken through just outright theft, fraud. All of those are quantifiable and what their families would have received. And I love that idea, and I'm writing that down. So thank you. Thank you.
So Daisy, I just want to say, I'm sorry. Go on, Xenia.
No, go ahead, Lane.
I just wanted to say, Dazina, I hear the fear, and I also hear you say go broad, and at the same time you're saying it's broad, but you're saying let's focus. Actually,
Broad
let's do
appeal.
this first, and then this first. So, yeah, I just wanted to frame that. Go on. I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
Can I jump in here?
Let's Xenia, and then Antoine. I'm sorry. Then Tom. Go ahead. Sorry.
I actually, Daisina, I actually have a visceral reaction to that, oddly as it seems. And one, because I feel like I've been chasing fear my whole life. I'm done chasing fear. I'm done being bullied. I'm done being pushed. I'm done being declared and defined that I should be doing something another way but I get your point that there's something at stake, my life. My life is at stake if I stand up, but I feel like I've had enough. I've had enough of being placating to my own fear, because at the end of the day, it really is my fear that that's dictating my reaction and how I drive and determine my intentions. I'd like to, but I do feel like, and so I'm race recovery, right? I am pro-Black, decolonized Blackness, that's me. But I also realize that at the heart of this is a deconstruction of our social system. Like it has to be deconstructed and reconstructed. There's no way, I don't believe, for us to come in and potentially rebuild a system that honors and easily sort of moves into reparations without a deconstruction of the system that held up that whole legacy of indebtedness in the first place. So to think that we can do this nicely, and to think that we can do this with just asking permission, and is not going to happen. And so some of us are going to have to be on the front line and take the heat and take the hit. Some of us will stay in the background to sort of hold it fortified at the front, but it's going to have to include some of that ugly stuff.
Thank you. So we want to pull in Antoine and Tom, and we need white people on the front lines. This ugly stuff and stepping up is not going to be Black people on the front line. It's got to be white people. So that's what we're here to talk about. And Antoine, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, definitely. You said about military. I got my ID right here. Military. So I dealt with racism in the military. I was in a nuclear program, and I was one out of 50 people in my class. I was one. I was the chocolate chip, if you want to put it in that, in the bunch and stuff. But just that, knowing that only so many they let into that program, because, and I believe racism and everything, regardless of your education, some of those things have changed now, but still, I went through those things. And the military, the government could be, while these people are coming through the military, could be setting up another phase of reparations through that right there, starting from military in the past, going towards the future as we serve our country. And I raised my hand to die for my country. For everybody on the screen, I raised my hand to die. At any point in time, I'm here to protect and serve. And at the same token, that I feel I'm so confused. As being a mathematician, a nuclear engineer, I'm all about logic and what's there and what's the correct way, and looking at what's in front of me. And it's so illogical for this thing, like you said, for it to still be going on. To see thousands of people dying, that are one color. To see someone to put money towards that, to see people to go to a place and put nooses up. There's still a lynch bill out there, people. It's still a lynch bill. It's just, I feel so confused and just so, why? And then I look at my daughter and say that at any point in in time she can go out and die because of the color of her skin. Why? So confused.
Take a deep breath.
Wow.
Tom, you were going to say something?
I just want to frame something first. Sorry about that, everybody. I heard you say, Antoine, I raised my hand to die. And I connecting that to what Diane said, it's got to be white people on the front line. So it's not just, are we willing, because of the climate of this country, it's not just, are we willing to, be taxed or whatever it is, but are we willing to stand up to protect Black people when the shit hits the fan?
Yeah, because I didn't raise my hand just for Black people. I raised my hand for every color, everybody.
There you go. You raised your hand to embrace a system that was equitable for everyone, not just Black people.
And you raised your hand knowing what the system is. You raised your hand anyway.
Anyway.
Wow.
And to think that our ancestors did that without even having what Black people have today. Like, what did they have back during World War I for them to do what you did, Antoine? Like, and that's why I feel like the honor to them. Like, how do you stand up and fight for a country that spits in your face because you know that you're fighting for generations to come? Like, my ancestors, they didn't know my name, but they did what they did so that I could have a life that was better than theirs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not going anywhere
Antoine,
else
for your service.
I thank you. I'm not going anywhere else. I'm going to be here. My ancestors built the advancements that allowed this country to be a place that is best to live in. I'm not going anywhere else. So we're going to make it happen here. I can see why people might want to leave, but I'm living right here, and I'm going to get mine right here.
And you deserve that. And I think I hope more white people get on board to help you do that, and to, support you in that.
Well, it's not a matter of helping her. It's a matter of getting back our humanity and disgorging all the wealth that has come to us. It's not about us helping. Black people don't need help. And in fact, in some ways, at least the Black people I know, would love just some land and to get away from us. To get away from fucking white people. I don't care if you're progressive. It's all fucked up. It is, and I know it. And so let's just be honest. It's not about helping Black people. It's just working. We're the really sick party here.
Come on,
We're very, very sick.
When Zinnia says, I want mine and I want it here, I want that for her too. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but she's only we need to work on us and not say, oh, what can I do to help Xenia? Of course I want to support her, but I can't just sit there and be like, oh, I'm a good white person. What can I do? That's the last thing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Xenia, it's the last thing you would ever need is any of us trying to get in there and say, what can we do for you?
Right.
We haven't worked on ourselves yet. And that is a huge problem.
That's where the dialogue comes in. That's where the lovey-dovey shit comes in, even though I don't like it either.
But it has to be a dialogue among us with whatever Black person has the fortitude to get in there and do that with us if that's necessary. But, that's to me what the huge problem is. And to be honest, I don't see that happening. And again, I go back to the tort model of just, we owe a debt. And then whatever talk goes on around that, good, I don't really care, because I don't think that's going to help the talk.
Say something after you, Zena.
There was a study done, and you might have all seen it, where the kids were shown two pictures. And one picture was with a Black boy on the ground and a white boy standing behind a swing. And then the next picture was the white boy on the ground and the Black boy standing behind the swing. And they held this picture up to two different groups of kids. Well, so they looked at all different shades and backgrounds and Black and white kids. And they asked the kids to interpret what they saw in the images. And the Black kids were the kids who said something compassionate. Oh, he fell off the thing. Oh, he was waiting for his turn. The white kids were like, he got pushed off, or he didn't get his turn to get on. So I agree with you, Jordana. This is not Black people's work. This is a white person's job to begin, really fashion in your mind a different paradigm about where the problem lies. Because the problem doesn't lie with Black people needing something. We've been able to manage to stay here, being put down and pushed back for so many generations. We don't if you gave us a head start, we would leave everybody behind. It's just, I think white people have to get to the point where they get to the place where they understand what is holding them up.
Correct. And related to that, Xenia, so Diane and I, and Diane, you can speak to this, you and I have looked at photographs. We've looked at photographs of lynchings. We've looked at photographs in Boston where you've got the white people kind of standing around. I always look in the white people's faces because what are you doing there? Like, how is it possible? And Pharaoh and Mark, they talked about, in Boston, grown ass mothers, throwing rocks. And I mean, like, what is wrong with you?
It's messed up.
Right. And I look in those faces, and you and I have talked about that, and then I also look in the faces, by the way, at a Black wedding, at a Black wedding or a Black event, there's some white people in there, or a baptism by a river, and there's somehow some white people. I want to know who those white people are. How did they go against the grain of the rest of that trash of white people? Like, who are those white people? I want to know what's in them that they feel comfortable with Black people. They were invited, one would hope, to these very private and heartfelt events, primary life events, baptisms and so forth. Like, they are with Black people, and this is going back decades. So I want to know about both groups of white people. Yeah. The second group being quite small. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is, when we look at the beginning, it all started with commodities and capitalism, and what are we trading to get something? And the indigenous as well as African Americans was the commodity and stuff, and it became right now as we're talking about mental health. It's a mental health instability as well as an ethical instability. We need to, when we talk about a cultural mindset change in our community, because we still have generations teaching the same unethicalness, to say that this person is inhuman to another person, that they are devalued, that they do not have what you have, teaching people on continue on, that is a cultural mindset we need to change. And capitalism, I'm okay with capitalism and everything. I want to go get my McDonald's and everything. And so, but it's the unethicalness of capitalism to say that, okay, we have 30 Black people, how do we utilize them to get more money? That's that mindset that we need to change. That is still here.
There's nothing ethical about capitalism. So get that out of your thinking. There's no ethics in capitalism. I want to bring Tom into the discussion. He's thoughtful looking. So Tom, where are you in this? And is anybody going to speak to the white people who are against this? But Tom, go ahead.
Thank you, Diane. I've happily waited my turn.
Yes. Go, Tom.
Well, there's so many things that could be said, but Jordana wants to know about those white people at the wedding or the baptism. So my wife is going to be the maid of honor for a very dear Black woman friend of ours because we love each other. If you don't like the word love, well, get over yourself. I'm going to tell you something here. White supremacy exists because of hatred. If you read Wynton Marsalis after George Floyd was killed, he was talking to his daughter, and his daughter couldn't get to the right answer as to why those police do that. And he said, because they enjoy it.
Yes.
They enjoy it. Wynton Marsalis, I have the article on my computer. That's hatred. That's hatred. So I come from the place of an individual personal relationship with any human being that I encounter. And I expect to bring kindness to those people. Well, you don't want to call it love, call it kindness and generosity. Now, the problem in America has to do with, it's institutional, but how are we going to change it? Now, I'm not saying that any of you are wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just telling you this is my approach.
Mm-hmm.
We have to change people's hearts. White people have to change their hearts. Yes, white people have to help white people change their hearts. And I've been doing work to do that here in Milwaukee. And one of the ways I've tried to do this through the Catholic Church. Oh, are they racist?
Oh,
I tell you.
that's a
Let me
tough
tell you
one.
this, and I hear and I honor what some of you have said. Xenia, yeah, I'm going to get mine now, and I'm tired. She didn't say I'm tired, but she said I'm done chasing fear, and I agree with you. Now I'm going to make another idea here. A number of my people are Native American. The Native American people, when they were getting put on reservations, they said there were those warriors who said, I would rather die fighting than live and die a slow death on the reservation. This is where I think perhaps Xenia is coming from. Do we want to die? This gentleman here, Antoine, he put his life on the line for a system that's totally fucked up, as Jordana wanted to say, as she said. So again, and he spoke about mentality. He said, right, mentality. So what is the mentality? The mentality is about hatred. The mentality is about fear. White people are afraid of black people. Black people are afraid of white people in some instances. Conversation. I bring people together who are white and black, and we have conversation about what it is to be human. And we can talk about those issues that divide us, that are causing this tension, the fucked up system. I do this in person, on Zoom, people, every month. Conversation, the conversational model that Diane promoted. Absolutely, absolutely, it works, and you can do it, and you can create safety. And how can you create safety? You create safety by being kind, by showing kindness one-on-one, one person at a time. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't try to change it systematically. I get that. So let me just comment on that part.
Hold on just one sec. I just had, can I just say one thing about something that you just said?
Sure.
I'm appreciating what you're saying about kindness, about love, about one-on-one, and when that one person's talking to that one person, we're not on the same level, right? One person's being pushed down, one person's being pushed up. And so that conversation can't happen, oh, we're just human. Yes, that's right. Yes, we are just human, and that conversation has to happen that way. But without the realization that one is being pushed down and one is being pushed up, that conversation is not going to necessarily go.
It is going to go, because in those moments, the person who's black, who's speaking to me, knows they're safe. They know they're honored. They know how much I care about them, because they know how different I am from the people who they know in Milwaukee. They know they're safe, and that is absolutely different, and it does make a difference.
But can you say that for every black person that you know, or that you could encounter?
Yeah, the people.
Are you presuming that they're safe? Are you presuming a black person you talk to knows they're safe, or do you ask them? Like, how do you know that you're saying that?
When they're in conversation with me, when they're in my presence, I can create the feeling of safety.
I think Jordana's question is...
But how do you know that? How do you know that you're doing that for someone?
Because they speak from their heart to me. They speak from their heart to me, and they're willing to tell me whatever it is that they want to say. It's authentic. There were those 6 things. It's authentic. That's what I'm talking about, authentic. It's when you come from the place of deep love that you can reach that other person from their heart, because they know, they feel it.
Well, you know what? You know what, Tom? I'm here listening to you talk about this place of deep love. I don't feel it. So, and if I have to wait until I get into a personal conversation with you, and you somehow magically make me feel that, I'm going to go right back to these spaces and I'm not going to feel it. So that is, people get married, black and white, and until she or he calls that their husband or wife a nigger, then they feel like they had love. But there's a lot of, Xenia, I'm calling on you. Go ahead.
That's exactly it. But you know what, Tom, to you, I'm following up with what Diane said, because I do feel like I've seen kindness, but then I've also seen kindness, hatred cloaked in kindness. They, you know, in the South, we say kill them with kindness, because you're going to kill them, but you're going to be kind doing it. The one thing I would say, that if there was anything that white people could do potentially to demonstrate a capacity to be embraced by Blackness, is to stand up against white supremacy. If I saw a white person standing up against white supremacy, then I would feel safe. Then I would say, oh, well, maybe that's somebody who potentially can align themselves outside of the benefit that whiteness offers them and look at me as a human being. If they can't separate from white supremacy, and they can't stand in the market space of American society and do that, I don't trust them. I don't care how kind you are.
I have been personally threatened by white supremacists here in Milwaukee. I have stood up against white supremacists here in Milwaukee, and I have personally been threatened by them. And I'm lucky that I'm not dead yet.
Yeah.
How's that for you?
Yeah.
So
thank you. I just want to say quickly, Tom, that you said white supremacy exists because of hatred, and I would suggest white supremacy exists because of money and power. Yes. And yeah, hatred comes along with it, because the hatred dehumanizes the people who are the butt of, meaning the I don't want to say victims, but the people affected by white supremacy. It's not hatred. If it was hatred, we could get rid of it. It's the power of money and power that keeps white supremacy in place. So I just wanted to say
that's why capitalism is no medium for getting to where we want to go.
Correct.
So, Lane, you want to?
I want to throw this saying out. James Baldwin said, the reason people think it's important to be white is that they think it's important to not be black.
Yes.
And black represents something that has no power and has no leverage.
When you're white and you think about the things you get or don't get, you're saying, am I getting something good because I'm white, or am I getting it because I'm not black? Which goes to that point of James Baldwin.
So I just want to frame that we're now having two conversations. There's the conversations about reparations and harm and redress of harms, and also the conversation about how can we have the dialogue? Can we dialogue? We may think that we're making a safe place for black folks to talk to white people, but do we know that? And what actually are the conditions to make it safe? Dizena, you've been trying to speak.
And excuse me, and beyond the circle. So, you know, Tom, we may be in a conversation, and I may in that situation feel like you are being authentic, and I feel safe in that space. And my thing is, and so what? Like Diane said, I leave that space, and then I go into my neighborhood, or I go into the next space, and we're only as safe as we come in, right? So you can't make me feel safe. If I come in wounded and traumatized, you can do whatever you want to. I'm not going to feel safe in that space. So that coming full circle back around to that healing spot, like I know that I have a lot. I have it on audio and the book. I have both. So, you know, that's the work, like taking it out of the individual conversations into the circles, into the large groups, into action, where it's real, because talk is cheap.
And I would bet, Dizena, if we got to the place where we were outside the individual and into the circles, and it felt like that was the place where this was really beginning to take root, reparations would be a simple conversation. We would not be fighting about how to make reparations possible. People would understand, the blinders would be removed, and people would then see, oh, wait, their humanity is the same as my humanity. How? Whoa, oh.
Yeah.
And they would see how their humanity has been chipped away at so much that there's hardly a human speck left.
Man. Oh my goodness, girl.
And they would work for that, for themselves.
Yeah.
Redeem themselves.
Yes.
Their souls are shrunk and lacking and about to disappear.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. I'm here not just for your liberation, but for my liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with and for that, I'll put my skin in the game.
Well, and that's why I think I can visualize how, because when you say all the marches and everything, you see a brigade of people and everything, and to see white people stand up in front, but not just stand up in front of a brigade of white supremacy, but to see they have their kids with them and their families with them, for their whole family system to stand in front of us and support us, but then to turn around and give back because of the privilege of what they're getting, to give back some of the things and put it in place in the policies and procedures in a systematic way. And I wanted to say the other thing, I was at an event and I was speaking to a police officer, a Black police officer, and we talked about the church and the police officers and stuff. And what if the church had brung in some of the young men and women, Black, to the police station, whatever it's called, the morning report or whatever. Every morning they get to see these young Black faces of what they're going out, who they should be protecting, all of the people they should be protecting, but they can see it. And then when we talk about, I work with United Way, and you talk about the campaign fund and everything, you got to donate. What if they remember those Black kids, and this is how they can actually put money into these Black kids inside this community? You're not just there to make money and protect and make money as a police officer, but you're there to protect everyone there, but you're also there to put something back in that community. If we can set
But Antoine, let me, while you're talking about white people bringing their families, that is not something they don't understand. Look back at the lynching pieces. They brought their babies on their shoulders to point, and they watched people burn. They cut pieces off. They taught their children. Their grandparents were with them. That's what they taught their children. And that's why it's still in their hearts today. It's passed down generation after generation.
I hear you, Diane, and I hear the fire in what you're saying. And what I hear Antoine saying is that those white families he's talking about are bringing their children to protect against the white supremacists. And that's a new model.
Yeah, that's good. But I'm just pointing out that white people understand what it means to bring your family. So let's move it beyond the George Floyds, because you can see how quickly that is gone.
And
Diane,
you know what? Sorry,
I just want to check in with you, Diane, because we're over the time that we had allotted to this, and this is so good and so important. And I'm also wondering about bringing in other people, because I think other people probably have other important things to say about this. I don't want to stop what's happening at the same time.
Okay, so this is an opportunity.
Yes, please,
I just want to make a closing
had her
comment.
hand up too.
Being in this fishbowl, Xenia, am I saying Xenia? I want you all to know that just however many minutes we've been in here, I'm holding my fear by the hand instead of being behind it. And I'm ready.
Okay.
We've got to do this, and I can't be afraid. And so I appreciate you and everything that people have said here, because that fire and the passion and the safety and the serving the country and the reparations and all of that makes me know that I can do this. And I'm ready to put myself out there and ready to bring people in, because this is real. This is vulnerable. This is authentic. This is what's going to make it happen.
Thank you.
And so I appreciate each of you, and I appreciate this process, and Lane and Jordana and Diane and Farrell and the Racial Justice Collaborative. Like, yeah, me and Fear, we're right here.
Right.
Thanks, Daisina.
Thank you, Daisina.
And me and my fear.
And we appreciate you, Daisina. You know that.
Right. I just
I'm scared too.
Yeah, I mean, and this is probably going to be opening another can of worms. But Tom, I did have a visceral reaction to something that you said moments before, and I'm not sure how to unpack it with this group, but it felt like performative. In some respects, I felt like you were saying, you know, my wife does this, I have this book, I stand in front of the white supremacists. It felt somewhat performative. And as I was thinking about it and thinking through it in my mind, I'm going back to what Lane said about how it actually isn't about how you, maybe I need to reframe what I said. It isn't about how you look to Black people. It is the work that you do for you to recover the humanity that's been lost in this process for white people, not for you as a person standing in for Black people. I'm struggling with kind of how to land on that, Tom. I hate to sort of throw that in here. It feels like we say in psychiatry, a doorknob statement, because you're on your way out the door and let me drop this bomb. But I thought if this is going to be a true, authentic process, I felt like I had to offer that.
But Xenia, I call it white bona fides, and I've seen it in lots of groups. You'll have an older woman like, I marched with Martin Luther King. I've got a Black grandson. Like, they want to like lay out what they have as if that's going to make them more palatable. Now, I don't know if Tom was doing that or not, but that's what I call it, is the white bona fides. To prove somehow that they're good.
I just want to apologize to you, Xenia. Xenia or Xenia? What do you say?
It's like an S. It's a soft S. Xenia.
Xenia. So Xenia, I want to apologize to you because I actually thought that same thing when Tom said that, and I didn't say anything, and I left that to you to say, and it shouldn't have been a doorknob comment. It should have been right then in that moment. And in that moment, I wasn't keeping you safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go on, Diane.
So let's do what Lane suggests. We don't have long, so we want to bring everybody back in. So I think the easiest way to do this is if Adam, if you can remove the spotlights, and we're all still here. And not only will we remove the spotlights, but let's everybody else. Now I just clicked the gallery view. So now everybody's here on my screen. Take off bring your videos back. So the questions that we had for this session, Lane, can you repeat the question so people can?
Hey, Diane, can we also, the chat is still disabled. Should we enable it again?
Yeah, but first, let me just read the questions first, or I'm going to lose them.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
What are you noticing in your body? What were you noticing in your body? What did people say that you resonated with? Did you feel your position or your feelings changing? What moment was hot for you, and what was said that made you feel something? If people could address those questions as we're briefing, that would be great.
So the easiest way to do this is for people to unmute themselves and speak up.
Keith has had his hand up for a long time.
Okay, Keith.
Yeah, my experience of Tom was I actually wanted to hear more of what Tom was saying. I think he was going to go on something else, but he never did. But I felt Tom brought up some things, you know, I mean, he used the word love, but the idea, I feel that to a confident heart, trials are like a child's play. In other words, if you're confident that what you're doing is humane and is right, then you just go do it, you know? And if you have that, things will work themselves out. And if they don't, at least you lived a life of, you know, with confidence about what is right, and you did it to the end. So I didn't pick up on Thomas being, you know, I mean, that wasn't ingenuous. I actually wanted to hear more of what he said, whether I agreed or not. I just wanted to hear more. But I just think people should just be confident from their heart and go out and just, you know, live what's right. And if it means you are afraid, so what? Be afraid, but still do it.
Yeah, let me stand behind Keith on that one. Just do it. And you'll learn and you'll grow. Let's just do, everybody do what they feel in their heart. And because that's who we are.
Lou wanted to say something.
And John's got his hand up too.
Oh.
Yeah. And hi everybody. And sorry, I am in the car because I had to go somewhere. You probably can see me. I am watching the road, I promise you. I mean, I had so many feelings. All have been expressed at some level. But there was one thing that keeps standing out to me is I think unless and until we decide to be activists, meaning doing things, whatever those struggles are, tenants work, education work, prison work, whatever it is, that's how white supremacy shows itself. So I love the dialogues. They were beautiful. I don't want people to hear otherwise. I do think, though, that as a racial justice collaborative, we have to think about ways that we are going to get ourselves involved in the actual fights that people are involved in today. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Lou. Who else was it, Lane?
John, but now I only see his bicycle.
Okay.
There you are, John Kimball.
Oh, sorry. I just finished a chicken and I finished a loaf of bread in the oven. I'm sorry. I had to sit on my hands to watch the group. Brought a lot to the forefront. And Jordana can attest to this. I used to be probably one of the most patriotic people in the country. Would get into arguments with friends and family over this country. Whenever they would say something negative about this country, man, I was up in arms. I even stormed out of a room several times as a result. But now, the work needs to be done. But do I think it's going to change? Do I think the hearts are going to change? I'm planning my exit strategy. I'm leaving. Not that I'm giving up the fight. I'm taking care of me. See, you don't get in the boat until you check and make sure the life preserver's there. Okay? So you don't prepare for this reparations without making sure you've also prepared for the possible repercussions. Is it going to change? Look at the history of man. Country after country, people after people. I hope it changes. Do I think it's going to take Jesus himself coming back, if you believe in that line, for it to change? Yeah. I'm going to work and hope it does. But as for me, hey man, this place is broke. I'm out.
And you know what John is now? John is speaking to a near hopelessness about the heart of this country. And if you look back at Eyes on the Prize, if you look back at the civil rights movement, people had hope. They believed that it was about education. And if they just could get educated, they would be accepted. Black people believed that Black people know that's not true.
Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X were right. Just leave us alone. Just leave us alone. We'll be fine. You know, look, with integration, look what happened to Black educators. I went from having lots of Black teachers to none. To none. Welcome to Black teachers. You know what?
Can I jump in, John?
Yes, sir. I'm done. I'm gonna mute myself.
Hey, brother, I was feeling a lot of what you said, and I've studied plenty of philosophers, history, you know, historians who said the same thing, and some of them did leave. You know what I mean? But there was something that Jordana said that I laughed for about 5 minutes, and I missed half of what was being said. She said, she said, if you give us some money, give them some money and some land and leave them the hell alone, that's what they want. And I laughed for a long time. I'm not trying to make it a bigger thing than it was, but it was so true. It's like a lot of us just want to be allowed to be human beings and live our lives. And if you keep poking the tiger, that tiger one day is going to wake up knowing that it's a tiger.
Right.
It's going to be hell. So we trying not to do that. That's why some people saying I'm going to leave. Some people are saying I'm going to have to walk with my fear in my hand so that I can live my life.
Yeah.
Like my friend Izina said, this is what people who look like me and who look a little, you know, on this side of that shade, we deal with this all the time, every day, like all the time. That pendulum thing that Lane took us through earlier, I was thinking that that's the pendulum that we deal with like constantly. When we decide, am I going to go outside today? When I was in high school, I remember some days wondering if I was going to go outside and something was going to happen to me. And that feeling never changed. And I'm not a high school anymore. I used to put on KRS-One in my head and play You're Slipping, just so I could have a mentality to deal with the streets. And I didn't live in the roughest neighborhood, even in my city.
Right.
This is real for so many of us in this, you know, children. I just listened to the whole thing. Oprah got nothing on this as far as reality.
Right. Right.
Diane has always kept it real, and I'm gonna shut my mouth now. Let somebody else speak.
I feel for Dazina because she lives in Central Florida, and I know what Central Florida is like. I live in South Florida, and we have our own issues. But you know, that's Central Florida. You know, that's Klansville, USA. Still, to this day.
Well, thank you, everybody. Go ahead, Antoine will be the last.
Yeah, one last thing. And I think Senna, say it wrong now. I thank you for being honest in what you said with Tom. So I'm actually going to be honest and open to what something you had said earlier, and it was between you and Laura. So, and it's a situation that happens out here that we talk about white savior, but we also have black savior. And earlier, Laura said something honest in that, you know, that I do have privilege, I do have this, but Senator, you automatically jumped in there to almost say something to almost console her. And so, and I think we do this on both ends. We're consoling someone when you should be like, okay, thank you. Get up, get on your feet, and fight with me. Now, here's my Cash App and everything too. You know, let's do this together, and let's do this. You know, I'm just being honest. And instead of babying another community, knowing that they know what has happened in a community, knowing that white privilege and white supremacy is alive, understanding that, but don't console so that you want to put them back in the house and put them back to bed while you're still fighting. Allow them to get up, read this book and everything, watch this video, come alongside with me. I'm going to lead the fight and everything, guide you along the way, but allow us to do this together. And then the reparations becomes, now you put together a plan, like you got a budget, you have investments, invest in this new model to invest into a community that your ancestors put down. over years and stuff like that. But yes, that the whole consoling back and forth, we need to really look at that and call ourselves on that.
I love that. Can I just jump in? I know we got to go.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for that. I would say, though, that was not my intention. My intention was because I don't want her living in guilt, because guilt, it doesn't have activity to it. Guilt doesn't get you any progress or any movement. I need her out of her feelings and into some action. And I don't need her waddling in self-pity or guilt or nothing like that. So yes, but I totally agree with you. Thank you for bringing that up.
This is so exciting. Lane, let me call on Lane to say a few words to end this for us. We appreciate everybody here so much.
I'm going to say the few words to end this. I don't know.
Well, you say a few words and I'll come back. I want to hear your voice at the end of this.
I am just so moved by what everybody is saying right now. I don't have words right now. I'm just so appreciative of what everybody's saying, and I want to hear from you, Diane, and Daisina is so good at closing us out too. I'd love to hear from her too.
Yeah, I think the same thing. Daisina, can you just where are you? What words can you say now?
So the words that come to me are holy crap on a cracker. The vulnerability shared, the authenticity, the loving call outs, the pulling people up, the pulling ourselves up, the just being in the fire. This is what the Racial Justice Collaborative creates. The people that come into this space, the people who are attracted to this work, we are already divinely inspired to do this work. And we found a place. And so what's on my heart is to acknowledge the organizers. Diane, I don't think you sleep.
I don't.
Lane, you are far, you're right there too. And the education and the love that you all put into this space is felt at such a deep level that we must keep this going. We must fund this initiative handsomely because these conversations, at least in my world, aren't happening. They're not happening at this level of depth. And so my word is to know that every word said today, every tear that's been dropped, every tight chest are all seeds to what we are in this for. We're planting seeds. And when we see that bar graph of how long slavery existed and how long, and seeing that we're in this little spot because we have this amount of power, we don't have to wait 200 years to get to where we need to be. So my word is this: keep your feet grounded, keep our hands held together, recognize the fear, but not let it drive the bus. And let's stay in communication. Let's keep this moving. Let's keep ourselves moving. Let's keep ourselves honest, because this is life transformation in action. And you all are doing it. We all are doing it. And so with that, I say ashe, namaste, amen, hallelujah. Y'all got any other ones to add? All of the things. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisina, thank you. And let me say before I bring Frank on that that's exactly what we're going to do, Daisina. And I'm looking at Lane, and I'm looking at Jordana, and I'm looking at Pharaoh and Frank and Kathy. We are committed to this, to this is the first dialogue like this, but every single one we do next year is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper because we're creating a model. This is what a national model needs to look like. We need to talk about race. So, Frank, what can you tell us about anything that you know right now about next year or how people can get involved? And Christina put up our donations thing. We can't do this. We can't continue to do this without money. It's not going to happen. So if you want to contribute, or if you know other people who you want to send us to get contributions or to do this work, do that. And so Frank, tell us about next year that you know about.
Okay, well, we're still working on some of the things for next year. But first and foremost, I'd just like to thank everyone that came to the event, everyone that's kind of stuck with us for the year, because I know I'm starting to recognize faces and names, and I'm always happy when people show up. Because certainly we can't do any of this without the people that come and participate and support our efforts. It is literally the village growing the nation is what we're trying to do. So we really appreciate everyone that comes out and supports us, and that's encouraging to see. For next year, we have a number of events on the docket. Right now, the first one coming up will be in February, I believe. The easiest way to keep abreast of what we're doing is the racialjusticecollaborative.com. I think it was posted. Look in the comments. You can see there's an events section that shows what we have coming up. And I know all of our events happen through Eventbrite. And if you go out to Eventbrite and you see the Racial Justice Collaborative, you can follow us. And what that does is every event that we do, you'll get an email saying, you know, someone that you're following has a new event. So you can keep up that way. And again, I'd just like to really thank everyone that came out. And I know pretty soon we'll be heading to what we are loosely calling the after party. So people are more than welcome to stick around, talk some more, and dialogue with everybody that came here. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Well, thank you. And what Frank said, if you go to Eventbrite and you follow us, you will get notified every time we do something. Frank, we don't have a date yet, but Black History Month is February. So we're going to do something in February. So look for it. And we invite you to stay for the after party. So Adam, can you put on the outro?
Let's talk about it.
This is Sundiata.
Let's talk about race.